Wisdom and love within my heart. Wisdom and love within my thoughts. Wisdom and love within my words. Welcome. I'm Sister Who. Today I wanted to address the question word, what if? Actually, two words, I suppose. In the introduction, what if is depicted with me standing in the middle of this giant chessboard, because there's so many wonderful metaphors in that, because for those who are familiar with the game of chess, there's 16 pieces, and the front row are called the pawns, the back row you have, let's see, the rook, the knight, the bishop, the king, and the queen. Some people, I had one person who suggested that it was primarily a game about war, and I said, well, not necessarily, because there's also the sense in which everything is a part of everything, everything's interconnected. And so in dealing with the black and white pieces on the chessboard, it's also a question of dealing with the dark and light sides of oneself, desirable qualities, undesirable qualities, hidden things and known things. Dark is not always bad and light is not always good. They're just representations of different sorts of understandings. But in asking the question word, what if, is the awareness, the complex, broad awareness that the movement of any piece could change the entire outcome of the game. And to have that many pieces all at the same time creates that many possibilities and that much potential. Because of course, in the game you're playing with another player, and so any choice you make with any one of your pieces could elicit any one of just as many responses from the other player. And so each person or each player contributes something, and then the other contributes a response, and then a response to the response, and so on. And that's where the question what if gets horrendously complex, because it's not just what happens if I move this one piece, it's what happens if I do this series of moves in response to that series of moves by the other person. And of course, if you change the series at any point, you change the outcome because you change the other person's responses. And so what if becomes this fascinating dance where you're never quite sure who's leading and who's following. And according to what criteria we decide who's the winner and who's the loser. And what does it really mean to be a loser anyway, other than that you accomplished a very defined, in the case of chess, the game is won by essentially trapping the king, so that the king cannot move, or there is no way to prevent the piece labeled the king, from being taken or eliminated from the board, because the game is not allowed to continue if either side doesn't have a king. There are rules set up for the game, not because it has to be this way and this is supposed to have some higher indication for how your life is to be lived or what's right or wrong, but as a way of shaping in a minimal sort of way the interaction between the two players who are expressing themselves through the 16 pieces. And of course, life situations get even more complex than that. When you consider that every situation any of us ever encounter in our places of employment, if we're in college, at a local store, in our churches, in our synagogues, in whatever, even out on a hiking trail in the wilderness, in whatever religious or social setting one finds oneself, as many people as there are there, each of those is a contributing element. And when you consider that at a football game, for example, there may be thousands of people, that means there's literally thousands of possibilities for what could happen there in terms of people's specific individual experience, because any one of those thousands of people could dramatically affect your experience. By putting something in your path or giving you something to which to respond, that is not at all what you expected to find there. Someone might go to the theater and see a totally anomalous person sitting in the next row, uh, and wonder, who that person is, where they came from, why are they here. Perhaps if it's a different sort of play, we get partway through the play and this anomalous person suddenly jumps up and runs up on stage. And then perhaps most of the audience would guess that, oh, that person is part of the play, just hidden within the audience in order to create a unique theatrical experience. So there is the what if that always hints at, well, not always, sometimes hints at a decision-making process. What if I do things differently? What if I try something I've never tried before? What if I interpret this person differently than I've ever interpreted them before? What if the person I think is an adversary, I deliberately, carefully, wisely, not recklessly or carelessly, what if the person I think is an adversary I treat as a friend? Will that bring out something different in that person that they would not have otherwise shown me? Or will they confirm that they really are the person I don't want to include in my social circle because they don't know how to have good relationship? What if they were to learn how to have good relationship? What if they never learned? I was talking with a friend the other day about how do we make good things happen in our lives, in our relationships. And I said that the challenge within every such opportunity is that we cannot give people the opportunity to do the right thing without risking that they will do the wrong thing. And so it becomes kind of this, what some people call hedging your bets, that you put some kind of buffer around your decisions and your actions so that if people do make a bad decision in responding to you or in sending something negative your way, that you have the ability to step aside or to deal with whatever's coming at you. But unless you give them that opportunity, they won't have any opportunity to do the right thing. In order for someone to be a hero, they have to have an opportunity where a hero is needed. In order for someone to demonstrate that he or she is a trustworthy person, they have to be given an opportunity where they could just as equally demonstrate that they are not a trustworthy person. If we don't give them that opportunity, if we don't take that risk, we essentially rob ourselves of the positive relationship that could result from them demonstrating themselves to be a trustworthy person. So we have to find ways to, this sounds like a total contradiction, we have to find ways to safely make ourselves vulnerable. And maybe from a more enlightened perspective, there is no way to make yourself vulnerable without deciding what it is you can afford to lose in order to find out whether there is a positive relationship to be gained. I'm reminded of the musical Les Miserables, in which a bishop invites an ex-convict into his home, and the ex-convict responds by stealing some of the silver, and is caught by the police and brought back for questioning, and the bishop responds, no, I gave him that, and then asks the ex-convict, why did you leave the best part, and gives him additional silver, the candlesticks on the mantelpiece, you forgot those. And of course the ex-convict is totally humbled by this, and the police are, because the bishop are insistent, the police are willing to accept that, okay, that's what the bishop said, so we don't have any grounds for arresting this guy for stealing the silver. But the bishop had to take a chance on that happening, and then he had to take a chance in giving more to this man from what, as he could. And of course the whole story is built on him promising to become an honest man, to use this silver to become a good person. And in that sense, the bishop was choosing to invest in Valjean, the man in the story. And in the same way, each day of our lives, often unnoticed, there are all sorts of opportunities in which we can invest in each other. And we take this word, what if this person felt loved for one blessed moment, even though they may never have felt love before? What if this person felt trusted, even though no one has ever trusted them before? Would they, like Valjean, turn into a hero who carries a wonderful story forward and spends his life helping other people? It is absolutely possible. There's no way of knowing what can happen if someone is willing to invest a little bit of love, a little bit of kindness, a little bit of trust, and maybe a silver candlestick like the bishop in the story. There are all sorts of ways of doing this. But if we never ask the what if we assume that society is predictable, if we take a cynical attitude that everyone who can will always take what they want from you, or take whatever they can from you, that life is an adversarial process of protecting whatever you can claim to own, until you finally die, and then it all gets auctioned off and divided up or left to inheritors who do the same. What if the things we do in life really do matter? What if every act of love really is rewarded, even if we don't see it at the time? At the time that the bishop in the story of Les Miserables gave Valjean the silver candlesticks, he had no idea whether it would mean anything. Whether 5 years hence Valjean would be a better person or not. It could all be for naught. It could have been an expression of his wish, of the bishop's wish, that went unfulfilled. Because I'm sure there were other times when the bishop gave to, if that's the sort of person he was, I'm sure there are other times when the bishop gave things and was disappointed because people didn't take the opportunity and the resources that he extended and make good use of them. And there are, every day in rush hour traffic around every major city, there are times when we have the opportunity to show kindness, and somebody puts their blinker on and you can let them in. Or, as some people, they speed up and tell them, no, you have to get behind me. And sometimes it's very difficult to change lanes without almost causing an accident, because there is such a competitive adversarial attitude out there. It may be prevalent, it's not required. What if, for one day, we decided to be giving, and every time somebody raced for a door ahead of us, if we were there at the same time, we opened the door for them and stepped back to let them enter first. And every time they put their blinker on, we slow down just a little bit to let them in. What kind of world would we begin creating together? If we could answer the question, what if, would that kind of servitude, that kind of generosity, that kind of largeness of spirit, that we recognize this person whose name we do not know is struggling to meet a deadline because they're afraid of what might happen if they don't, or that somehow this is essential, and we give them the space to find out whether it's essential or not. And whether they learn the lesson today or next week, the more often they see people being generous, perhaps it will even inspire them to do the same. What if everybody was generous? What if instead of buying a more expensive car, I bought the car I needed and used the leftover money to help people whose cars were chronic repair problems? So that fewer people in my town would have chronic problems with their automobiles. We may even be absolutely friends when we're driving down the highway, and over a month's time, maybe we would suddenly notice that there were many fewer rush hour traffic accidents than there had been, and many fewer people getting wounded, and many fewer insurance claims for repairing cars that had been in rush hour accidents. And then maybe, in my idealistic fashion, insurance companies wouldn't charge so much because they wouldn't have to pay for all these claims. Or the cynic would say maybe they'll find something else to do with all the money. What if cynicism was not the only answer? What if believing in people really did accomplish something good? And it can if each of us, individually and collectively together, begin to push our world in that direction. If when we're the one who works at the insurance company making the policy decisions and stuff, and such, that we do make the decision. Are we going to give everyone a huge bonus this year, or are we going to cut the rates and be nice to our customers because they, after all, are the reason that our business exists? And maybe we would decide, the customers deserve it. It's been a hard year. We're in an economic downturn. Numerous people have been laid off. We need to help the community in which we live by making things affordable instead of putting more money in our own pockets, to invest that money in the health and economic strength of our communities. What if everybody invested in the economic strength of their communities? At one time when there was a real estate surge going on in the Denver metro area, I calculated there were houses that could be bought for $500,000, and there were houses that could be bought for $150,000. And I calculated at the time that if you could find someone who was going to be really, really frugal with the money, that the difference between those two, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but it seemed to me, the way I calculated it out, that if you found someone who was willing to work as a tutor at a minimum comfortable level, not rich or anything, but if they were, for the peace of mind it would be, and the lack of stress, the desirable situation, if someone was willing to be a teacher, a tutor for your children, and live at a very frugal, modest level, that you could basically, by choosing to live in a modest $150,000 house instead of a $500,000 house, I think what I remember is that I calculated someone could live in a modest sort of way for 20 years on the difference. You could hire a private tutor for your children for 20 years on the difference between buying a modest house and an excessive house. It's kind of like Dolly Parton in the movie Straight Talk, when she is leaving her job and they say, well, you'll need a car, and she says, nobody needs a $65,000 automobile. I'm more of a Pontiac or maybe a Chevy. And I'm sure Pontiac and Chevy make good automobiles. I'm sure there's a lot of very affordable, modest vehicles that could be purchased instead of the high-end ones. And what you could do with the money in the difference in price is amazing in terms of the way you could strengthen your communities and eliminate problems. Crime rates would go down because people wouldn't have the impetus for stealing things when they could get them in legitimate ways. But it comes down to values, because somebody wanted a $500,000 home instead of spending the difference in the price on 20 years of educating their children. And that's disappointing, but of course that's a choice that people are free to make. But it keeps coming back to this question of what if? What if we valued each other more than we valued our cars and our houses and our lifestyles? What if we valued each other more than we valued eating out in restaurants every single night? What if we valued each other more than we valued conformative ideas? That if my neighbor is a Jehovah's Witness or a Muslim or a Hindu, a pagan, a Christian, an evangelical, whatever my neighbor is, if I value my neighbor more than the fact that we agree or disagree on any particular subject, and learn to be friends with my neighbor, and am able somehow to establish communication and mutual respect between me and my neighbor. That I'm not trying to change them and they're not trying to change me, but we're each trying to be sure that the other is able to practice their religion, practice, have a modest but decent home life. We build a stronger community, and it becomes a win-win situation. This is not difficult to imagine, except if we're trying to imagine whether people would actually do this. What if we gave them the chance to show that they could? And what if we kept giving them the chance to do the right thing, rather than only giving them the most cynical choices and giving them all the reinforcement they could possibly need for maintaining those cynical choices? That when somebody decides to trust someone and something bad happens, and instead of saying, "I'm so sorry that happened," to say, "Yeah, you should have known better. You can't trust anybody these days." And the problem with that, of course, is that the more that is reinforced and the more that's confirmed, the less likely they are to give someone a chance the next time, and the less likely it is that it will ever happen. The more unlikely it is that we will ever have anything better. My argument frequently with people at the graduate school level, because there's a fine line and it's difficult to write a graduate paper because you have to cite and support everything. And so my complaint to some of my professors has often been, you're not allowed to say anything unless it's already been said. The problem with that is if you're not allowed to say anything that hasn't already been said, indirectly it's suggesting that we're not allowed to know anything that isn't already known, and ultimately that we're not allowed to grow. What if creates possibilities for growth? It opens doors of opportunity. It opens windows of new vision into area. What if probably the majority of movies made in Hollywood, and especially the more imaginative ones, and even a huge number of works of literature, stem from the basic question, what if? What if this particular possibility or capability that humanity has was extended to an extreme? What if we took this idea to a much greater extreme than anyone has thus far taken it? The book Frankenstein was written because the author was wrestling with the question of what if humanity had power over life and death, and what would we produce? And of course the author's contention is that it could only produce a monster, trying to manipulate when people live or die, whether they live again, in what form they live again. And even if you could create a truly wise spirit within a Frankenstein monster, what if the world did not have the maturity to accept this person and adversarially turned on this person? The sci-fi movies, science fiction movies of the 1960s that asked, what if people from outer space did come to Earth and greeted us in this or that way? How would we respond? And what if we didn't respond well? What would follow? And what if we tried to trust them and they proved themselves to be untrustworthy? The question word, what if, or the question what if, it is the launching point for so many movies and so many works of literature, because we want to know. There's something about being human that makes us incredibly curious, and we want to know, we want to grow, we want to expand, we want to become more multidimensional in our understanding and our thinking. And I think when we don't, we lose part of our humanity, we lose part of our soul. What if we chose not to ever lose part of our soul, but to reinvigorate the imagination, but to integrate it with wisdom and what knowledge we do have, to make it responsible and intelligent, and as much as we allow for it on an individual level, to steer that, to steer and nurture and mentor and guide that what if imagination within each human being toward becoming greater people than we would otherwise become. What if every student at every age throughout our school system was steered toward becoming a Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo or a Francis Bacon or a Shakespeare or a Madame Curie? What if? Where would we be? And what kind of world would we create? What if they were steered toward becoming Mahatma Gandhi or becoming like Martin Luther King? But in every case, not to become those people, but to become their own unique example of excellence and progress and growth and discovery and imagination. What if? The sky's the limit seems like a terribly inadequate phrase anymore, since human imagination has already ventured very, very far into space. The sky is the limit, simply meaning there is no limit. What if is what gives us an expanding, wonderful world in which to live instead of a box in which to fit. What if there was no box? What if we could go as far in any direction as we want to go for as long as we live?